The International Monetary Fund has warned of serious economic trouble for countries that overthrew their leaders during the Arab Spring. Tunisia and Egypt, in particular, are facing a sharp drop in growth well into next year. The challenge for these nations is to prevent more damage to their economies while spending enough to prevent social unrest. Jane Arif reports now from Cairo.
The protests that toppled President Hosni Mubarak were just the beginning of the change Egyptians are demanding. Finally freed to protest and even go on strike, public workers like these policemen are demanding a 200% pay rise.
I'm telling you, I have my rights, and I'm asking those responsible at the Interior Ministry for them. You took our demands, and we gave you enough time to fulfill them, but nothing happened. Nothing.
After decades of poverty and repression, expectations are incredibly high, but the transitional government has run out of money. With a huge disparity between the rich and poor, governments have traditionally responded with subsidies on fuel and food for everyone. Egypt's finance minister says that has to stop.
I say the cancer of the budget is subsidies, and unless we start treating this, it will kill us. This year, the subsidy allocated for gasoline and fuel products was £95 billion. That's very dangerous. In 1990 or 1991, it was £1 billion. In the last 20 years, the subsidy has increased 20 times. And it's still increasing.
The International Monetary Fund says it would like to see targeted subsidies that go only to the poor. Egypt is the Arab world's most populous country. Almost 78 million people live here, many of them surviving on a little over $1 a day. To meet even some of the demands for higher wages, the government will have to borrow money at a time when borrowing costs are rising.
I think that's the dilemma people in government now have. That is, they want to be responsive because people have salaries. The doctors in Egypt, the doctor gets something like £400 a month. That's less than $100 a month. So when people make demands to increase their salaries, I can sympathize with them. I understand them. And politicians have an additional problem. Not only do they understand, they want to be responsive. Right? Well, the trouble is, I want to give them the money, but where the hell do I get it from?
With the uncertainty created by both the revolution and the global financial crisis, investments in Egypt have dried up and tourism has dropped. Unemployment has climbed dangerously high and is expected to worsen. Inequality was one of the main reasons for the revolution. Political oppression combined with grinding poverty. A lot of the oppression is gone, but the economic hardship is about to get even worse. In Egypt and around the region, a combustible combination. Jane Arif, Aljazeera, Cairo.
Let's get an expert view now from Peter Middlebrook, who's the managing director of the consulting firm Geopolicity Incorporated. He joins us live from Dubai. Peter, I suppose the difference between Tunisia and Egypt compared with Libya is that they're both energy importers as opposed to energy exporters.
No, and I think what we're seeing, which is, I think, the core part of the strategic challenges faced by the Middle East at the moment, is effectively a twin Middle East growth future. You have economies which are, of course, exporting oil, and with reasonably buoyant international oil prices, they are, well, forecast this year by the IMF to have growth in the region of 4.9%. But there's another side to the story in the Middle East, which are those economies which are really struggling under the price of being importers of oil. And at the same time as the uprising has taken place, these governments are really struggling to find sources of revenue to have the significant increases in public expenditures which they are committing. In the case of Syria, for example, the government has forecast for 2012 up to a 59% increase in expenditures. The question is, how will this be financed? And in countries such as Libya, where GDP, the overall productivity of the economy has decreased by up to 50% this year, the structural fiscal challenges faced by many of these economies, which have been worst hit by the Arab Spring, have really yet to be felt.
All right, so where should countries like Tunisia and Egypt, for instance, I mean, Syria is an entirely different case, we'll leave it aside for a moment, but Tunisia and Egypt, where should they be looking? Perhaps should they be going cap in hand to their regional, richer oil exporting neighbours or to the IMF?
Well, I mean, I think what we've tried to lay out is that both of these countries, as with us, they have a unique set of challenges. But there is a storyline here. If you look at the UAE, and you look at the Qatar, countries which are heavily integrated within the regional and global economy and allow high levels of foreign direct investment, are generally being, the level of productivity is extremely high. For Egypt itself, it also faces another story. You've got a long-term decline in oil exports. Of course, that's being compensated in part by an increase in gas exports too. But the long-term picture is they have very heavy subsidies in the economy. That's true of Tunisia too. How do they subsidize through public finances some of the core and essential services under such an energy future?
What happens if the price of oil drops?
Well, if the price of oil drops, of course, theoretically it benefits importing those countries which are a significant importer of energy, and would have the opposite effect on oil exporters, although they may ramp up production as a result of that. But I think in many cases the strategic challenge faced by Egypt and Tunisia is, once one has gone through the route of political stabilization, is how does one chart a viable economic course that really does address the long-term structural challenges faced by the economy: a youth bulge, high levels of unemployment, declining productivity, certainly in terms of foreign exchange and exports, and how does one finance the perception that governments, to a large extent, are not delivering on many of the basic and essential services that people are on the streets to request.
Peter, good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us. Peter Middlebrook there, live in Dubai.
It's a pleasure.
Vote.